This is the claim that John made of himself. Okay? So, like I said, because of the little things that we know about John, the little strange things in his life, he's not a character that we easily appreciate. Okay? But what I want you to remember is that Jesus greatly honored John. Remember that Jesus said of John that there is no greater man among those that are born of women. That's a high praise. Secondly, remember when Jesus got into a conflict with the Pharisees and he told them, "Why didn't you believe what John said about me? You went out in the wilderness to see John. Why'd you go out there if you didn't want to believe the things that he said about me?" So Jesus had a high view of John. Jesus called him the greatest prophet, the highest prophet. So we're going to look at his life and see grace and truth in the life of John the Baptist and make a connection to our lives and to our church on the need for us to be gracious and to be truthful. If I was to ask you a question, if I was to say, knowing what you know of John the Baptist, do you feel that he was more gracious or he was more truthful? I think most of us would say that he was more truthful because maybe he was more confrontational. He got into more arguments. We might not say he was a very nice person. We might not say he was a very gracious person. But I believe that he was, and I believe we're going to see that in his life. We'll see both things, grace and truth, in the life of John the Baptist. So I want to show them to you in his ministry. So would you look with me at chapter 3? Okay, in chapter 3, we know that that's where John 3:16 is. For God so loved the world, he gave his only begotten Son, whosoever believes in him should not perish but have everlasting life. And that, Jesus says that when Jesus was talking to Nicodemus. And so after that, John, the writer, he writes the testimony of John the Baptist. Okay? So look at verse 22. It says, "After these things came Jesus and his disciples into the land of Judea, and there he tarried with them and baptized." So Jesus comes into the land of Judea with his disciples and he's baptized. Okay? Verse 23, "And John was also baptizing in Ainon near to Salim, because there was much water there, and they came and were baptized. For John was not yet cast into prison." So here you immediately see that there's going to be some conflict here, because John was already there baptizing. That was his ministry, out in the wilderness by the Jordan River. And then Jesus and his disciples come into town, and they start baptizing as well. And you know that that's going to create a conflict. I would remind you that in a church, when there's conflict, it's usually when people want to do the same thing. When only one person can do something, but there's two people that want to do it. Like, I don't know if this ever happens in the music department, but if only one person can do a solo, but then there's three people that think that they should, that creates a conflict in a church. When you want to do the same thing, you want to do it for the Lord, but only one person can do it and do it effectively, that's going to create a conflict. Or when there's overlap in your ministry, right? We in a church will never have a conflict, usually not, until there's overlap in someone's ministry. When two people are doing the same ministry or doing different ministries at the same time, or two people have a different opinion of how we should do a certain ministry. When there's overlap of opinion, when there's overlap of time, when there's overlap of personality, there's always going to be a conflict. And so, just here, there's a conflict, right? It says in verse 25, "There arose a question between some of John's disciples and the Jews about purifying." Okay? This is always a question, because remember, John and his disciples, they were more strict in their lives than even the Pharisees were. They were very strict. And Jesus and his disciples were not very strict. You remember, sometimes Jesus would have a conflict with the Pharisees, where the Pharisees would come and they would say, look, John and his disciples are so holy, your disciples don't even wash their hands before they eat. Right? And so the same conflict happens between John's disciples and some of the leaders, probably of the Jews, about purifying. So they might have said, oh, look at Jesus' disciples. They're so free, they're so liberal. And you guys, you're so strict and you're traditional and you're legalistic. You wash your hands with these rituals all the time. Why is there a difference between you guys? So there was that conflict that rose up, not between Jesus and John, but first between John's disciples and some of the Jewish leadership. Right? So here's what happens. In verse 26, it says, and they came unto John. So John's disciples come to him, and they say to him, Rabbi, he that was with you beyond the Jordan, to whom you bore witness, behold, the same is baptizing, and all men come to him. So it starts with a question about purifying, and it gets into this conflict between Jesus' disciples, well, John's disciples, and them being envious of Jesus' ministry. Remember, Jesus got his start in ministry when he was baptized by John the Baptist. So John's disciples are looking at this, and they're saying, wait, you gave this guy his start. You made him what he is. You baptized him. You testified him. You bore witness. And look what's happened. He has become more popular than you have. So there was envy there. Remember that Jesus and John, because they had different personalities, remember John was very strict, very fundamental, and he would probably attract people into his ministry that were very black and white, very narrow, very traditional, very rules-oriented. While Jesus, remember Jesus, he ministered to tax collectors. He ministered to the poor. He ministered to people of ill reputations, like prostitutes, for example. So Jesus associated with a different kind of people. Jesus didn't turn anyone away, but the people that followed Jesus were a little different than the people that followed John. And so because of this personality difference, John's disciples are looking at Jesus' ministry, and they're saying, wait a minute, John, you gave him his start. You made him what he is. You bore witness of him, and now look what's happened. All men are coming to him, so they're envious. They're saying, you're the real thing. You're the original. And all men are going to him. It's like this. If it was modern days, right? How many people here use Facebook on the internet? A lot of people? Okay. Maybe a quarter of the room, okay? So it would be kind of like this. If this happened in the modern day, right? They might say to him, hey, he has more Facebook friends than you do, right? Or there's more people downloading his sermons than you. There's more people going after him. He has a bigger following than you do. And that's not fair because you gave him his start. You're the original. And now you're losing followers and he's gaining them. And there's something wrong with it. So the disciples of John are uncomfortable with this. Remember, this conflict is not between John and Jesus. This conflict is between the disciples of John looking at Jesus' ministry and saying, there's something wrong. We're a little bit envious of his popularity. Like I said, this is not a conflict between John and Jesus. Remember, in a church, in a ministry, in any service, that your friends, when they stick up for you, they will probably do you the most damage and the most disservice. Right? Because Sometimes when we get into a conflict, then people feel compelled to take a side. So if I was in a conflict with someone, there'd be a whole group of people egging me on and saying, yeah, you're right, you need to stand up for your rights, or whatever the issue is. And that just drives the conflict so much further. Something that could have been so minimal when more people get involved in the church, it spreads conflict. People take sides, and there's envy, and there's jealousy, and there's feelings that get hurt. So in a church, in a ministry, in a service, even at your job, don't allow people to stick up for you, because sometimes they will do you the most damage, more than you could have done to your own reputation. Don't allow people to defend you in the church. We're going to see how John handled this. Let me give you some examples from our church. This is a humorous one. I'm not being serious here, but sometimes when we would have career group during March and April, and a lot of our career group people are also in choir, so there would be that overlap between choir and career group. And some of my friends from the career group would say, oh, you should go in there and break up that choir and bring them all in here. Well, no, why would we do that? They're trying to serve the Lord just as we are trying to serve the Lord. Why would we create a conflict over that? So let's look at the way that John handled this, okay? First, I want you to see the graciousness of John. We're going to look at grace and truth. So first, look at how gracious John is, okay? So verse 27, it says, and after they bring this accusation to John, verse 27, John answered and said, a man can receive nothing except it be given him from heaven. And look at his first answer. He gives 4 responses. First answer, he says, all things come from God. So essentially he's saying that the popularity and the following that Jesus is getting, that's given to him by God. The popularity and the following that I had when all men came to me, that was given to me by God. You have to remember how intense this is. John was extremely popular. I was saying in the morning service that someone like Sam Fry, for example, he goes out on the streets of New York City and tries to talk to people. And sometimes that can be very difficult. People don't want to talk to you. We at Woodside, we're on the corner of, almost a big intersection at Woodside, and it's hard enough to get people to come into the doors of the church. John didn't have that problem. John went out into the wilderness, and the people came to him. The people came to him by the thousands. He didn't go out and get people, say, oh, I'm going to create my popularity, I'm going to create a following. He went out there, and they went to see what he was all about. So he had an immense following. And after they enjoyed that following, that popularity, and people listening to his teaching and being baptized, it all starts to shift, and they start following Jesus. John says, my popularity it wasn't about me. It wasn't about my popularity. It's not my following. It's not my popularity. All things come from God. So that's his first answer. Second answer, verse 28. He says, you yourselves bore me witness that I said, I am not the Christ, but am sent before him. So he says to his disciples, you already know, what I've been saying, that it's not about me. I'm not center stage. I'm not the Messiah. I'm preparing the way for the Messiah.